Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a sweet little girl who was loved by everyone who knew her. But the one who loved her the most was her grandmother. This grandmother adored her so much that she gave her a beautiful red velvet hood, which the little girl wore all the time. Because of this, everyone started calling her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother called her and said, "Come here, dear. I have a piece of cake and a bottle of wine for you to take to your grandmother. She is feeling ill and weak, and these will help her feel better. Please go before it gets too hot outside. Remember to walk nicely and stay on the path. If you run off the path, you might fall and break the bottle, and then grandmother will get nothing. And when you get to her house, don't forget to say good morning before you start looking around." "I will be very careful, mother," a Little Red Riding Hood promised, and she gave her mother her hand to show she meant it. With that, Little Red Riding Hood set off for her grandmother's house, which was on the other side of the forest. As she walked along the path, she enjoyed the fresh air and the bright sunshine. She saw flowers blooming and heard birds singing. It was such a beautiful day that she almost forgot her mother's advice. Suddenly, she saw a butterfly and ran off the path to chase it. After a few minutes, she remembered what her mother had said and quickly returned to the path, determined to be more careful. As she continued her journey, she met a wolf. The wolf was very sly and wanted to eat Little Red Riding Hood, but he dared not because there were some woodcutters nearby. Instead, he asked her where she was going. "I'm going to my grandmother's house to take her this cake and wine. She's not feeling well," a Little Red Riding Hood explained. How kind of you," the wolf said, pretending to be friendly. Where does your grandmother live?" "She lives in the little house under the 3 big oak trees," a Little Red Riding Hood replied. I see," said the wolf, his mind already plotting. Well, I must not keep you. Have a good journey." The wolf then ran off as fast as he could, taking a shortcut to the grandmother's house. Little Red Riding Hood, however, walked slowly, stopping occasionally to pick flowers for her grandmother. Meanwhile, the wolf reached the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. Who is it?" The grandmother asked. It's me, Little Red Riding Hood," the wolf said, disguising his voice. "I have some cake and wine for you." Come in, dear," the grandmother called out. The wolf entered, and without another word, he gobbled up the grandmother and put on her clothes. He then climbed into her bed and waited for Little Red Riding Hood. When Little Red Riding Hood finally arrived, she was surprised to see the door open. She walked in and felt something was strange. But she did not hesitate and went straight to her grandmother's bedside. "Good morning, grandmother," she said. "Good morning, dear," the wolf replied, trying to sound like the grandmother. But his voice was gruff, and Little Red Riding Hood noticed that something was off. "Grandmother, what big ears you have," she said. The better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf replied. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said. The better to see you with, my dear," the wolf replied. "Grandmother, what big hands you have," she said. The better to hug you with, my dear," the wolf replied. But grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have," she said. The better to eat you with." The wolf roared, and he sprang out of the bed to grab Little Red Riding Hood. Just then, the woodcutters who had been nearby burst into the house. They had heard the commotion and came to see what was happening. They chased the wolf away, rescuing both Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, who was thankfully unharmed and hiding in a closet. Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson that day. She promised never to stray from the path again and to always listen to her mother's advice. And they all lived happily ever after, safe and sound.